The drone feed was a ghost's eye view, a thermal river of grainy, monochrome pixels flowing from an RQ-9 Reaper circling in the silent, frozen emptiness of the stratosphere above Damascus. The air up there was too thin to carry sound, too cold to sustain life. A perfect perch for a god of silent judgment. Far below, the image depicted a narrow alleyway in the Al-Hamidiyya Souk, a canyon of ancient stone bisected by the impossibly long skeletal shadow of a minaret. The heat signatures of the evening crowds bloomed and faded like embers in the dark, a spectral dance of life and commerce. In the Tel Aviv command center, the light was always the same, buried so deep beneath the Kiryat military headquarters that it existed in a state of perpetual, refrigerated night. The room was a sterile sanctuary of calculated violence. The only sounds were the whisper-quiet rush of circulated air, scrubbing the atmosphere of emotion, and the low, constant hum of server racks processing a torrent of intercepted data from half a continent away. The air carried the metallic, ozonic tang of overworked electronics, the faint, bitter scent of yesterday's burnt coffee, and the almost imperceptible aroma of industrial-grade floor polish. It was the scent of a place without windows, a tomb where men and women stared into the abyss until the abyss stared back. Eitan stared at the main screen, his eyes burning with the familiar grit of 36 hours of sustained vigilance. His back ached with a dull, persistent throb from the unforgiving ergonomic chair. The image, relayed with a 1.2-second latency from the drone's gimbaled sensor ball, was his entire world. In it, a man named Farid was about to walk into his electronics repair shop, a tiny, cluttered hole in the wall that had, for the last 72 hours, become the focal point of a multi-million-dollar intelligence operation. The weight of it all pressed down on him. A physical pressure in his chest, a dull ache that settled behind his sternum like a stone. It was the weight of lives, of years of work, of the ghosts who populated the quiet corners of this room. Farid was not the target. Farid was the delivery system. He was the bullet, the poison, the razor blade, all wrapped in the unassuming package of a frightened, middle-aged man whose only desire in the world was to be somewhere else, anywhere else. Biometrics are spiking. A quiet voice murmured to Eitan's left. It was Nava, an analyst half his age with dark, intelligent eyes that saw definitive patterns in digital noise the way a desert wolf sees tracks in sand. She could trace a ghost through the ether, and in this world of shadows, that made her a queen. Her console displayed a cascade of data streaming from Farid's location. ECG is a frantic sawtooth. Heart rate is 135/90. Respiration is shallow. Galvanic skin response is through the roof. He's on the edge of a full-blown panic attack, a heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. Eitan didn't need the stream of data piped from the microscopic sensors woven into the collar of Farid's worn cotton shirt to know that. He could see it in the man's gait, a subtle arrhythmia in his stride that spoke of warring impulses, to flee, to freeze, to obey. He saw it in the almost imperceptible hesitation before Farid's hand touched the cool brass of the doorknob. A moment of profound reluctance translated into a millimeter of empty space. He saw it in the way Farid scanned the street, a jerky, amateurish motion that screamed fear to anyone who knew what to look for. And in this room, everyone was looking. They were the most practiced voyeurs in the world. "He'll hold," Eitan said, his voice a low rasp, gravelly from disuse and too many harsh, unfiltered noblesse cigarettes he could no longer smoke in the sterile confines of the command center. He could almost taste the phantom smoke, a ghost on his tongue. He willed his statement to be true, forcing a certainty into his tone that he did not entirely feel. He had chosen Farid himself from a list of a dozen potential assets. He had overseen the cultivation, the approach, the meticulous process of psychological demolition and reconstruction required to turn a civilian into a tool calibrated for this single, monumental purpose. He remembered the look in Farid's eyes in that sterile hotel room in Amman, a look of utter desolation as the choice was laid before him. If that tool shattered now, the mission was over. 5 years of painstaking work vanished into the Syrian air, and the target, the true reason for this entire subterranean theater, would melt back into the shadows from which he had, for a fleeting moment, emerged. The target's name was Ghassan al-Hamra. To the Western world, he was a phantom, a name on a sanctions list, a ghost blamed for bombings that had scarred cities from Buenos Aires to Beirut. To the men and women in this room, he was a butcher. He was the architect of the embassy attack in Kenya that had killed 12 of their own, including 2 of Nava's cousins who had been working diplomatic security. He was the mastermind behind the bus bombing on Dizengoff Street that had claimed the life of Eitan's former mentor, David, a man who had taught him how to see the world not as it was, but as a series of interlocking threats and opportunities. "The world is a lock, Eitan," David used to say, his voice thick with the smoke from a Turkish cigarette. "Your job is not to break the door down. Your job is to find the key." Al-Hamra was a man who moved through the modern world without a digital footprint, a specter who communicated only through face-to-face meetings and a closed loop of trusted couriers. They called him the Shadow, and for 5 years he had lived up to the name with infuriating perfection. Mossad had thrown everything at him: signals intelligence, human intelligence, satellite surveillance. They had tracked his wife to a plastic surgeon in Geneva, his children to a boarding school in France, his mistress to a seaside villa in Cyprus. They had turned his bagman in Dubai and bugged the offices of his financiers in Tehran. But they had never gotten close to the man himself. He changed cars 3 times to go to the market. He slept in a different bed every night, never staying in one location for more than 48 hours. He was a creature of pure, instinctual paranoia, a man who survived by trusting no one and nothing, until Nava found the crack, the single, tiny, arrogant flaw in his otherwise perfect operational security. It was a thread, and she had pulled it until the entire tapestry began to unravel. "It's the phone," she had said 3 months ago, her voice cutting through the stale air of a late-night strategy session. The room smelled of cold pizza and exhaustion. She had pointed to a grainy image on the main screen, a photograph captured by a long-lens camera from a rooftop overlooking a Tehran hotel balcony. It was an image enhanced by 3 separate algorithmic filters, a pixelated mess to most, but to her, a Rosetta Stone. She had spent a week running pattern recognition software on it, convinced there was something everyone else had missed. The image showed Al-Hamra's hand, resting on a table next to a glass of mint tea. In it was a phone. Not a smartphone, not an encrypted military-grade device that was the standard for men in his line of work. It was a Nokia 6310i, a relic from 2002. A brick. The room had been silent for a moment before the realization dawned on Eitan. "He thinks it's clean," he had said aloud, the pieces clicking into place with the cold, satisfying snap of a well-machined weapon. No GPS, no Wi-Fi, no complex operating system to hack. It's off the grid. He thinks it makes him invisible. "It makes him predictable," Nava had corrected, her gaze unwavering, burning with a fierce intelligence. "He uses one model. He trusts it because it's antiquated. Its legendary battery life, its simplicity. It's a point of pride for him, a symbol of his discipline. And like any electronic device from that era, it has a component with a finite lifespan, a component that has to be replaced eventually. The battery, the BLS-2N lithium-ion battery. The plan, codenamed Trojan Spark, was born in that moment. It was audacious, bordering on insane, a throwback to the kind of Cold War wet work that was supposed to be a thing of the past. They weren't going to hack his phone. They were going to turn the phone itself into the weapon. They would build a bomb, a highly specialized, miniaturized explosive device, and disguise it perfectly as a replacement battery. Then they would find a way to place it in his hand. That's where Farid came in. His dusty little shop in the sprawling, chaotic heart of the Al-Hamidiyya souk was one of only a handful of places in Damascus that still stocked parts for such ancient devices. Al-Hamra, or one of his couriers, had been a customer before. A small transaction for a replacement charger logged by a local informant a year prior. A deep background check revealed Farid's vulnerability. A 9-year-old daughter with a rare blood disorder, requiring experimental treatment only available in the West at a cost that was astronomical. The approach had been clinical, precise. Aitan had handled it himself. A quiet meeting in a sterile hotel room in Amman, Jordan. An offer laid out on the table between 2 cups of untouched coffee. Her life, her future, for his cooperation. Aitan had watched Farid's face crumble, the agonizing calculus of a father choosing between his child and treason playing out in his haunted eyes. In the end, there was no choice. Love was the most reliable leverage of all. Now, on the screen, Farid finally turned the knob. The door to his shop creaked open, and he disappeared inside. The view switched instantly. A micro camera, hidden in a dusty display case of second-hand chargers and tangled cables, blinked to life, showing the cramped interior. The feed was choppy, the colors washed out by the dim fluorescent light that hummed and flickered overhead. Farid moved behind the counter, his hands trembling visibly as he arranged his tools. A set of miniature screwdrivers, a soldering iron, a magnifying lamp. He was trying to look busy, to appear normal. But his every movement was stiff with a terror so profound, it was almost a physical presence in the Tel Aviv command center. Audio is live, Nava confirmed. Mic sensitivity is optimal. They could hear the faint street sounds bleeding through the thin walls, the cry of a vendor selling bread, the distant, distorted call to prayer from the Umayyad mosque, and beneath it all, the frantic thumping beat of Farid's own heart, a drumbeat of dread amplified by the sensitive microphone on his collar. For the next 2 hours, they watched him. It was an exercise in pure tension. They watched as he served a handful of customers, his voice cracking as he quoted prices for screen repairs and replacement cables. Each time the small brass bell above the door chimed, the collective breath in the Tel Aviv command center hitched. Was this it? Was this him? Each time, it was a false alarm. A teenager with a cracked Samsung, music leaking from his earbuds. An old woman wanting her landline fixed, her voice a reedy complaint about the state of the world. A Syrian army officer wanting to unlock a phone. A request Farid nervously but correctly refused. Aitan felt the old scar on his cheekbone begin to ache. A phantom pain from a piece of shrapnel that had nearly taken his eye in Beirut 20 years ago. A parting gift from one of Al-Hamra's earlier projects. The shadow had been his obsession for half a decade. He knew the man's habits, his preference for Ceylon tea, the brand of Turkish cigarettes he smoked. He knew him more intimately than he knew some members of his own estranged family. This was the endgame. All the pieces were in place, all except the most important one. The watchmaker, the quiet ascetic head of the Mossad's technology division, had personally overseen the battery's creation. He was a legend, a man who could build a listening device inside a grain of rice. He had shown Eitan the prototype in his sterile, white-walled lab, a place that smelled of antiseptic and ozone. On the outside, it was perfect, indistinguishable from a standard Nokia battery. Same weight to the gram, same dimensions to the micron, same faded blue and silver sticker, artificially aged with UV light and carefully applied scuff marks. It even held a small charge, enough to power the phone on for a few seconds, just long enough to pass a cursory check. The casing is mostly hollow, the watchmaker had explained, his voice as dry and precise as his schematics. We've milled it from a solid block of polymer from the inside, leaving the walls paper thin. Inside, 4 grams of PETN, shaped into a directional charge. It will not level the building. It will be precise, surgical. It's designed to focus the blast cone upwards and outwards, liquefying the device and ensuring catastrophic cranial trauma to anyone holding it to their ear. He had pointed with a metal stylus to a microscopic chip embedded near the gold-plated contact points. This is the receiver. Passive RF. It draws no power and emits no signal until it receives the activation sequence. The sequence is a 2-part, encrypted frequency burst. Think of it as a key and a tumbler. The first burst, a short pulse on the 150.725 MHz VHF band, wakes the receiver and charges a microcapacitor. The second, a coded pulse on the 433.92 MHz UHF band, which must be sent within 1.5 seconds, arms and detonates the charge. Any deviation, any other signal, and the circuit fries itself, rendering the device inert. It cannot be accidentally triggered by a stray radio wave or a cell tower. The Mossad team, the trigger men, were already in place. A 3-man unit, nestled in a rented apartment 200 meters from Farid's shop, with a direct line of sight to his front door. They had their own video feed and a directional Yagi antenna pointed at the shop, ready to send the kill signals the moment they got the word. The word would come from Eitan. His voice, and his alone, would be the key that turned the tumbler. The bell on Farid's shop door chimed again. A man entered, ducking his head slightly as he came through the low doorway. He was not Al-Hamra. He was younger, broad-shouldered, built like a street fighter, with a wary, darting gaze that swept the room in a single, practiced motion. He wore a cheap leather jacket despite the heat, and a thin, white scar bisected his left eyebrow. Eitan recognized him instantly from dozens of surveillance photos. Karim, Al-Hamra's primary courier, enforcer, and bodyguard. The Praetorian Guard. "Status red," Eitan said, his voice calm, cutting through the rising tension in the room. On the screen, Karim moved to the counter, his boots scuffing on the dusty floor. "I need a battery," Karim said, his voice a low, gravelly growl. The audio was crystal clear. "For a 631 OI. Farid flinched, a barely perceptible tremor that ran through his shoulders. "An old model," he stammered, his training kicking in. He was supposed to show reluctance, to make it seem like a difficult, bothersome request. "Very hard to find. I might have one in the back. Not sure." "Check," Karim ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. His eyes swept the tiny shop again, lingering for a full second on the display case where the camera was hidden. In Tel Aviv, a dozen analysts held their breath. Had he seen it? The faint glint of the pinhole lens? Karim's gaze moved on. He was impatient, not suspicious. Farid shuffled into a small, curtained-off back room, out of the camera's view. This was the protocol. He was to retrieve the package from a hollowed-out book on a dusty shelf. The battery itself felt inert, a simple piece of plastic and metal. But to Farid, it must have felt like it was pulsing with dark energy, a venomous snake coiled in his palm. He was in the back room for 10 seconds. It felt like an eternity. When he returned, his hand was shaking more noticeably. He was holding the battery, the Trojan spark. "This is the last one I have," Farid said, his voice thin and reedy. He placed it on the counter, trying not to look at it, his fingers recoiling as if from a hot coal. Karim picked it up, turning it over and over in his thick, calloused fingers. He examined the sticker, the contact points, even sniffing it for some reason. This was a critical moment. The watchmaker's obsessive attention to detail was being put to the ultimate test. Karim grunted, a sound of seeming satisfaction. He tossed a few crumpled Syrian pounds onto the counter. "Keep it," he said, and turned to leave. "Wait," Farid called out, his voice suddenly higher, strained with panic. He was deviating from the script. Eitan stiffened in his chair. "What is he doing?" he hissed to no one in particular. On the screen, Karim turned back, his eyes narrowing to suspicious slits. "It might not have a full charge," Farid babbled, sweat beading on his upper lip and forehead, glistening in the poor light. "These old ones, they lose power sitting on the shelf for years. You should put it in the phone now, see if it turns on." A catastrophic, unforgivable error. He was pushing. He was showing too much interest. Karim's right hand drifted instinctively towards the bulge of a Makarov PM pistol tucked into the waistband of his jeans. In the command center, the mood turned funereal. It was over. Farid had cracked under the pressure. "Don't worry about it," Karim snarled, his suspicion palpable even through the microphone. "If it doesn't work, I'll know where to find you." He walked out. The bell chimed, a mocking death knell. The room was utterly silent, save for the hum of the servers. Nava stared at her screen, her face pale. Eitan felt a cold, metallic dread wash over him. The battery was in play, but it was in the hands of the wrong man. They had no idea when or if Karim would give it to Al-Hamra. It could be today. It could be a week from now. It could be never. The Mossad team couldn't stay in that apartment forever. The window of opportunity, once wide open, was now closing with terrifying speed. Worse, Farid was now a catastrophic liability. Karim's parting threat was not idle. If the battery was a dud, he would be back. And a man like Karim didn't ask for a refund. He would torture Farid for information, and Farid, a simple shopkeeper, would break in seconds. He would give them everything. The entire network in Damascus would be compromised. "Pull the Mossad team back to the safe house," Eitan ordered, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Active surveillance on Karim. I want to know every time he breathes. And get me eyes on Farid. He's burned. We need to prepare for extraction. Or liquidation." The last word hung in the sterile air like poison gas. It was the brutal reality of their profession. An asset was a tool. When it broke, you discarded it before it could hurt you. For the next 48 hours, the operation hung in a torturous limbo. It was a new kind of hell for Eitan. The sharp tension of the weight was replaced by the dull, grinding agony of uncertainty. They watched Karim. He went from his apartment to a cafe, from the cafe to a gym. He met with other known Hezbollah operatives. But he never went near Ghassan al-Hamra. The battery, their silver bullet, was in a pocket, a ticking time bomb without a clock. Meanwhile, Farid was unraveling. The cameras watching his shop and the street outside showed him pacing like a caged animal, unable to work, jumping at every sound. He knew he had failed. He knew what Karim's return would mean. Eitan had to make a call. Pulling him out now would be a massive red flag to Al-Hamra's network. Leaving him in place was a death sentence. Eitan felt the man's life in his hands, and the weight was immense. It was Nava who found the thread, late on the second night. She had been mainlining caffeine and running complex algorithmic analyses on Karim's movements, cross-referencing them with years of accumulated intelligence on Al-Hamra's patterns. "He's a creature of habit," she said, her voice tired but electric with discovery. She pointed to a cluster of data points on her screen, a map of the Damascus countryside. "Every Thursday, for the last 6 months, Karim drives the same route, to a specific villa in the hills outside the city, near Blue Dawn. He stays for exactly 1 hour and then returns. We always assumed it was a dead drop or a meeting with a subordinate. But," Eitan prompted, leaning over her console, the scent of her strong coffee cutting through the stale air. "The villa is registered to a shell corporation, which we've traced back to an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps financier. It's clean, isolated, no close neighbors. Perfect for a high-level meeting. And every Thursday, around the same time Karim is there, we see a spike in encrypted radio traffic from the area, consistent with Al-Hamra's security details communications protocol. It's his weekly court, his one fixed point. He meets his master on Thursdays." Eitan breathed, feeling a surge of adrenaline cut through his exhaustion. "Today is Wednesday," Nava said, her eyes locking with his. "If Karim is going to deliver that battery, it will be tomorrow, at that villa." The plan was instantly, radically reconceived. They couldn't hit him in the city. The risk of collateral damage was too high, the escape route for the team too complicated. But an isolated villa? It was a gift from God. "Retask the OFEC 11 satellite. I want high-resolution thermal imaging of that villa, starting now," Eitan commanded, the fire reigniting in his gut. The room snapped back to life, the lethargy of the past 2 days evaporating. "Get the Mossad team geared up. We're moving them tonight. I want them in position in those hills by dawn. This is a one-shot opportunity. We will not get another." The next 12 hours were a blur of controlled logistical chaos. The Mossad team, led by a stoic, unflappable commander named Ari, were moved under the cover of darkness, ferried in the false bottom of a vegetable truck to a prearranged drop-off point. They carried their gear in sealed containers: a high-powered transmitter, a satellite uplink, long-range optics, and their suppressed SR-25 rifles. Their mission had changed. They were no longer just a trigger team. They were now the sole source of visual confirmation. By sunrise, they were in position, concealed in a ghillie-draped hide site dug into a rocky outcrop overlooking the villa. The view through their stabilized scope filled the main screen in Tel Aviv, a crystal-clear image from over a kilometer away. It was a luxurious, 2-story house of white stone surrounded by a high wall and a grove of cypress trees. A swimming pool shimmered an unnatural blue in the early morning light. It looked peaceful, idyllic, a predator's lair. Thermal imaging confirmed at least 5 armed guards patrolling the perimeter. 2 black armored sedans were parked in the driveway. No sign of the target's vehicle, Ari reported, his voice a calm whisper over the encrypted comms. But the security posture is consistent with his presence. We are green. They waited. The sun climbed higher, baking the Damascus hills. In Tel Aviv, coffee went cold in mugs. No one spoke. They just watched. They watched the guards walk their patrols. They watched a cook come out to the edge of the patio to smoke a cigarette. They watched the wind move through the cypress trees. They watched, and they waited. At 11 a.m. Damascus time, a black Mercedes approached the villa. It was Karim. He was waved through the gates without stopping. He parked the car, got out, and walked inside. "He's in," Ari confirmed. The tension in the command center became a physical presence, thick and suffocating, the air harder to breathe. Now began the true test of patience. The battery was inside the villa, but they had to wait for confirmation that it was in the hands of Al-Hamra himself. And not just in his hands, but in his phone. And not just in his phone, but against his head. The parameters for engagement were that precise. A kill was not enough. It had to be a kill that left no doubt, and no trace of the weapon's origin. The explosion had to obliterate the device completely. "We need audio," Eitan said. "Anything." The signals intelligence team went to work, straining to catch a whisper of electronic leakage from the villa. But the place was a fortress, a Faraday cage. It was shielded against electronic eavesdropping. Al-Hamra's paranoia was working for him even now. "Nothing," the SIGINT supervisor reported, frustration in his voice. "It's a complete blackout." They were blind and deaf. They had eyes on the building, but not inside it. The only thing they could do was trust the pattern. Trust that Karim would deliver the battery. Trust that Al-Hamra's old battery would be dead or dying. Trust that he would swap it out. It was a chain of fragile assumptions, any one of which could break and bring the whole enterprise crashing down. An hour passed. It felt like a lifetime. At 12:05, Ari's voice crackled through the speakers, sharp and urgent. "Movement. 2 individuals, walking on the patio by the pool. One is Karim. The other, stand by. Confirming." The long-range camera zoomed in, the image stabilizing with a soft whir. A man in a simple white shirt and dark trousers was walking beside Karim. He was older, with graying temples, and the confident, relaxed posture of a man in his own kingdom. He was holding a small cup of tea in one hand. "In Tel Aviv." Eitan leaned forward, his face inches from the screen, his breath fogging a small patch of the glass. He would know that face anywhere. He had seen it in his dreams and his nightmares for 5 years. "It's him," Eitan said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's Al-Hamra." A wave of relief and renewed tension washed through the room. The shadow was in the open. "He's holding his phone," Ari reported. "The Nokia. It's in his left hand down by his side." On screen, they watched the 2 men talk. It was a silent pantomime of death. They were too far away to read their lips. Al-Hamra seemed to be gesturing with the phone, complaining about something. Karim nodded, then reached into the pocket of his jacket. He pulled out the battery, the Trojan spark. "He's giving it to him," Nava whispered, her voice filled with a hushed awe. Al-Hamra took the battery. He turned the phone over, his thumb expertly popping the back cover off. He flicked the old battery out with a fingernail and tossed it onto a patio table. He slotted the new one in. He replaced the cover. The whole process took less than 10 seconds. "The package is delivered," Ari stated, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "Target is holding the device." Al-Hamra pressed the power button. The small monochrome screen flickered to life. He had checked it. It worked. Satisfied, he raised the phone to his right ear, turning his back to the camera to face the shimmering pool. He was making a call. This was the moment. The culmination of years of planning, of unimaginable risk and expense, had come down to this single, fleeting window of opportunity. "Mossad, this is command." Eitan said, his voice ringing with absolute cold authority. You have confirmation. The target is viable. I repeat, the target is viable. Understood, Ari replied. Standing by for your signal. Al-Hamra was a silhouette against the bright Syrian sun, a phone pressed to the side of his head. He was completely unaware that he was holding the instrument of his own execution. He was unaware that from a rocky outcrop a kilometer away, a man was entering a code into a transmission pad. He was unaware that 5,000 kilometers away, in a room deep underground, the man who had hunted him for 5 years was about to speak the 2 words that would end his life. Ari, Eitan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Send the first burst, on my mark. He took a breath, the air tasting of ozone. Mark. Signal 1 away, Ari confirmed. 150.725. The first encrypted pulse of energy, the key, shot across the valley at the speed of light. It was invisible, silent. It struck the receiver in the battery, waking the circuit from its dormant state. A microscopic capacitor began to charge. The device was now live. It was waiting for the second signal, the tumbler, which had to arrive within the next 1.5 seconds. Send the second, Eitan commanded, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his console. Signal 2 away, Ari said. 433.92. The second pulse, on its different coded frequency, followed its partner. It hit the receiver. The tumblers fell into place. The charged capacitor instantly discharged its energy into the micro-detonator. On the main screen in the Tel Aviv command center, Ghassan al-Hamra's head vanished in a silent, blossoming cloud of red mist and black smoke. The phone, the battery, and a significant portion of his skull were instantly vaporized. The concussive force of the directional charge slammed his headless body backward, a limp doll tossed aside by a giant, unseen hand. He hit the tiles of the patio and did not move. For a full 3 seconds, there was absolute silence in the command center. They stared at the screen, at the chaos erupting at the villa as Karim and the guards scrambled, shouting and firing their weapons blindly into the hills. Then Ari's voice, impossibly calm, came over the comms. Target down. I repeat, target is eliminated. Shalom. The room erupted. A wave of cheers, applause, and relieved sighs broke the spell. Men and women embraced. The tension of years had snapped like a frayed cable. Eitan did not join them. He simply stood up, his legs feeling strangely weak, and walked out of the room. He went to his small Spartan office and closed the door. The mission was a success. The shadow was gone. But he felt no elation, only a profound, hollow emptiness, the silence after a storm. He had poured so much of his life, so much of his soul, into the hunt, that he wasn't sure who he was without it. 2 days later, the debriefing was a formality. The Mossad team had exfiltrated flawlessly. The world's media was reporting that Ghassan al-Hamra had been killed by a freak cell phone explosion. A story so bizarre it was widely believed to be a cover for an internal power struggle. There was no evidence, nothing to trace back to Israel. It was a perfect operation. The Prime Minister called to congratulate him personally. Eitan accepted the praise with a quiet, detached thank you. As the furor died down, a final intelligence packet landed on his desk. It was the post-operation report on the asset, Farid. Eitan almost didn't open it. He knew what it would say, that Farid and his family had been successfully extracted from Damascus through the Golan and were now en route to a new life, a new identity in Canada. His daughter was scheduled for her first treatment at a top hospital in Toronto. The deal had been honored. But there was an addendum, a single page attached to the back, compiled by the research division. It was a deeper dive into Farid's background, standard procedure for a closed case. Eitan's eyes scanned the page, and he stopped. A chill, colder than the command center's air conditioning, crept up his spine. The report detailed Farid's family history in Lebanon, before they fled to Syria during the Civil War. It mentioned his older brother, a university student named Omar al-Jamil, and next to Omar's name was a date of death and a location: Beirut, 1996. Cause of death: killed in a car bombing outside the American university. Eitan felt the air leave his lungs. He knew that bombing. It was one of al-Hamra's earliest attacks, a brutal, indiscriminate act that had cemented his reputation for cruelty. He pulled up the old case file, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He found the list of victims, and there it was. Omar al-Jamil, Farid's brother. It all clicked into place with a sickening, horrifying clarity. The offer Eitan had made in Amman, the leverage he thought he had. His daughter's illness was real, a powerful motivator. But it wasn't the only one. It wasn't even the primary one. When Eitan had looked into Farid's eyes and seen the tortured calculus of a father, he had been blind. He had seen fear, but he had mistaken its source. It wasn't just fear for his daughter. It was the fear of a man about to step into the heart of the inferno, to confront the demon who had destroyed his family 20 years ago. Farid's panicked deviation in the shop, when he urged Karim to test the battery, it wasn't the mistake of a terrified amateur about to break. It was the desperate act of a man consumed by his own mission, terrified that his one and only chance at vengeance was about to walk out the door. He wasn't just a coerced asset. He was a volunteer. He had been hunting al-Hamra in his own quiet way for longer than Eitan had. Eitan leaned back in his chair, the sterile quiet of his office suddenly oppressive. He had orchestrated a masterpiece of espionage, a symphony of technology and tradecraft. He had seen himself as the puppet master, pulling the strings of his asset in Damascus. But the truth was far more complex. He had merely provided the weapon. The will, the cold, patient, burning desire for revenge. That had belonged to the quiet shopkeeper all along. Eitan touched the old scar on his cheek, a permanent reminder of his own history with the shadow. He stared at his own reflection in the darkened computer screen and realized, with a chilling certainty, that in the great, bloody game of ghosts and shadows, no one ever truly holds all the strings. Sometimes you are just an echo of another man's grief.